Okay, hello. So this is just a random thing. I was going to put together a video and all that with elements from the series and all that, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. So RWBY Volume 6 is coming up next month, and I first started watching this in March, which means I'm not a long-time fan, um, but it also means I've seen everything there was to date all in one watch through. Um, and I quite loved it. It was quite much better done than I expected. I mean, there was the first couple seasons were a little bit rough, with the exception of the fighting choreography, because Monty Ohm was the fighting choreographer. Um, the later series kind of lost out a little bit on the choreography for the obvious fact that replacing a genius is not an easy thing to do. But the characterization and the story has gotten progressively um, more complex and interesting so far to date, anyway. Uh, and I've got some predictions on the character arcs that are going to be in part 6, and I'm going to first say that I think it is going to be primarily one of the two heaviest I think it's going to be are on Weiss and RWBY. Um, Blake has already had, and I'll go over the other two for first on that. Um, Blake just had some serious closure on some of her personal arcs. She has opened up something of a new arc in that she has taken a very public stance of leadership with her people, and that's going to open her up to more emotional issues she is not used to. We also got revealed the bit with her friend Ilya, and there is some lingering emotional residue between Blake and Yang. The end of Volume 5 had had a touching moment between the two that kind of looks like the majority of that's glossed over, but they haven't had the talk that Yang and Weiss had. They haven't had the talk that Weiss and Blake had way back before in Volume 2. So there's possibly some lingering emotional things that need effective closure between Yang and Blake. But the narrative arc regarding Adam is complete, and I've heard most of the people I watched it with or seen it with quite agree that the closure of how Blake treated Adam at the end is quite satisfying. Um, the the One of the primary elements of that conflict was the emotional thing and actually standing up to him and dealing with some of the guilt and all that, and dealing with personal responsibility, and also taking him out of the center part of her life by kind of dismissing him and focusing on the overall more important matter at hand with the battle in Haven. She quite effectively made him irrelevant to her life. So emotionally speaking, Blake is done with Adam. Adam, of course, is not done with Blake, likely. He has been humiliated and he will probably want revenge. Almost definitely. And he was one of the character shorts that has been released for the season 6, so I expect him to show up again. But Blake's from Blake's point of view, she has had the emotional closure with Adam. So from this point on, he is a physical threat, but not a really an emotional or narrative one. Which, I mean, you could get the satisfaction of watching Blake beat him up, but really doesn't add anything to the narrative. It really doesn't add anything to the story to have that happen, and it takes away from other things. But so I am questionable on where Blake is going from here. I'm pretty sure they'll have some plans, but a lot of her central issue up to now, a lot of her was very firmly focused on Adam. So to have closure on that means that she is now sort of without a specific drive except for to do. She has a personal drive. She doesn't really have a narrative drive to her right now, but that'll have to be something they put in for later seasons. So I don't expect her to be a major focus. I expect to see some developing troubles with the new White Fang and the Faunus and the interactions between Faunus and humans, especially as we're going into Atlas. But I expect that to be primarily foreshadowing for later Blake arcs. I expect probably she'll come under fire from Adam at some point. But again, I think the thing about coming under fire from Adam is going to be a side matter for somebody else who does not have emotional closure with Adam yet, and that is Yang. Um, Yang's narrative conflict with Adam has not come to an end. Blake's narrative conflict with Adam is over. It's done with. It's resolved. Um, Yang's is not. He severely hurt her confidence in both her own fighting capabilities and her relationships with her friends, Blake specifically. So, and we have seen Yang have a lot of maturity grow into a lot of maturity over season 4 and season 5. She's thinking about things a lot more. She was never simple. Even in the first series, she was calling RWBY out on some things that RWBY needed to think through a little bit deeper than she was. So Yang's never been thoughtless, but she's always she's not had the same sort of driving personal, except for her mother, that the other two have. She's kind of been the casual one of the group. Her driving personality things are her relationships with her sister and her friends. For total, to be totally upfront, so people know, and hey, it's my ugly face. I am on when it comes in the matter of the shipping wars. Let's see, make sure it okay. I am somewhat, I guess you could call it Crayola, is what I've called it. Like a lot of my friends, I have a feeling that that the RWBY is very poly-friendly. And I have theories along that line. So, yeah, I'm not going to get into the romantic things on that because as much as I want it to end up being a poly thing, I don't really, it's not really that important to the storyline. Romance is a very side issue in a lot of these cases. Anyway, and if it turns out not to be poly, that is why we have this thing called fan fiction. So whatever the writers want to do with the storyline, go with what their vision is. If it turns out to, if it doesn't turn out to be poly, I'll be upset. And if it turns out to be crap, I'll be even more upset. But if it turns out to be really good but not poly, well, fan fiction. Anyway, back to what I was going. That's a little bit of a rant. So Yang does not have emotional or narrative closure with Adam yet. And in fact, there was a lot of foreshadowing of Adam and her going to be going at it in a fight at some point. At the begin, it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The episode in volume 4, she was having a sparring session with her father, and he was tie, and he was lecturing her about her use of her semblance and overdependence on it. And a lot has been made in the community about how Yang's semblance and Adam's semblance are very similar. Adam's lets out the power all at once in one really massive strike, while Yang's lets it out gradually, basically doubling her strength, but releasing it a bit at a time. In both cases, it doesn't really cancel the damage they suffer, so it still has that same big risk of over depending on it brings you to the brink faster than you should have. It's sort of like if you're in Sentinels of the Multiverse and you're playing Fnatic, it's sort of like depending your entire strategy around Wrath getting in your hand. If you end up not, you're going, if you do play that way, you're going to play Fnatic down to 1 or 2 hit points, because Wrath does more damage based on the difference between your current hit points and your maximum hit points. And if you go through that whole thing and you never get a chance to Wrath, then, or at the last moment your chance to Wrath is destroyed by some fluke or another, then all you've done is made yourself vulnerable, and you've not really contributed to the victory of the game. And that is the threat with Yang's thing. Is basically she's the Fnatic deck from Sentinels of Multiverse. That, or no, actually, Fnatic's more akin to Adam's, actually, because her Wrath is a single shot. But anyway, I digress. There was a bit of, and I'm rambling here. This is kind of a thing where I should have pre-recorded and practiced a little bit, but this is a fan thing. I'm not really advertising, selling anything, so I'm not really being that. I'm just sort of talking. Anyway, her father gives her some advice that what if she misses? What if her opponent is too strong? All of these things. Because then if she overdepends on her semblance and it fails her, then she is both weak and tired and has nothing to do. I think that's going to come into view. I think she is going to deliberately draw out the moon slice and direct it at something that is not her, or try to lure it out at somebody else, or not somebody else, something else. I don't know if she's going to go into the fight with that strategy, but I think she's going to come to that strategy. And I think it would be very satisfying if we even have the callback quote from her referring to what her father told her, something along the lines of, "And now you're weak and tired," before taking him out. But that's just me. So I expect Adam and Yang to have a fight, maybe several. I don't know if we're going to have the final fight between them in Series 6, but I think we're going to see some Adam Yang fighting. And I want very much for Yang. I do like the fact they split up the types of beatdowns Adam can receive between Blake and Yang. Blake has given him a emotional, political beatdown, and Yang now is set up for the narrative position to give him a very heavy physical beatdown. So that takes care of the two that I think are not going to be heavily focused on, because Yang and Blake got a lot of focus in Series 4 and 5. Like I said, one of Blake's main points of conflict got resolved in volumes 4 and 5. And actually, I haven't hit all of Yang's, because Yang also resolved a major conflict, and that was the issue with Branwen. Raven Branwen, her mother. And that also ended in a very emotionally satisfying scene. I have seen a couple things on the community, on the forums, about people complaining about Raven's character being nerfed in this last episode or whatever. I just don't see it. When I was watching it all in one go, my opinion pretty much every time Raven showed up was she was giving all the cues of a charismatic coward. Um, her main motivation for dropping out of the whole situation of resisting Salem was that it's impossible to beat Salem, so I'm just going to give up and make sure I'm the last one she kills. Uh, I will admit there is a chance for Raven to come out. The only thing that really kind of stirs her to break out of her cowardice and kind of tell that she surrounds herself with weak people who will just do what she says, or strong people that she had a hand in influencing before they thought to ask questions. Like her sidekick that was the fake maiden. But I think Raven Branwen has a chance to come back. I mean, it's probably likely that she's going to make an appearance because she was in the end series Stinger, and or it was implied she was there watching Ty. Um, but she has a long way to go. Pretty much every appearance she had was just showcasing that she had a lot of personal power and a lot of physical combat oriented skill, and she was a very intelligent person, but at her core every conversation she had just was a charismatic coward. That's what she is. Every conversation Raven Brenwyn has is full of evasiveness, getting people to trying to avoid questions, trying to um, avoid answering things, uh, not meeting people in the eye, raising her voice, calling out mistakes before other people can, to get people on the defensive and avoid having them question her. Um, and as doing everything she can to avoid conflict until it's forced upon her. I mean conflict. I don't mean her tendency to go around raiding villages. That's not conflict. That is predation. That's a different thing. She avoids anything she thinks has risk, emotional risk, physical risk. Raven Branwen doesn't go into risk unless she has to, and she isn't given a choice. So she has a chance to come out of it as a nice person, but for now she's in my not worth it as a character, as a person. I mean, she's an interesting character. As a person, she's kind of trash. As a character, she's very interesting. But the conflict with her and Yang at the end of Series 5 was a really heavy emotional closure for Yang, and it was a heavy bit of evidence of emotional growth. That's not the point where Yang grew. Yang had already grown to that point. You can tell that by when she willingly shut down her semblance when Mercury grabbed her and let her mechanical arm be dropped behind her rather than focus and let lose focus and turn towards him rather than continue chasing after for the main objective. Anyway, so Yang had some major emotional maturity and some major emotional closure. Blake had some major maturity achieved and some major closure. Um, let's see. There was a lot of closeness between Yang and Weiss. A little bit. Um, uh, but mostly with the focus on Blake. See, in my theories on Polly, I think Weiss. I don't think any of them are with quote unquote anybody at this point. I don't think there's any active romance going on. I think there's potential for it. I tend to think the link being RWBY and Weiss and Blake and Yang for the center four. But anyway, with others on the outside. Anyway, off the romance again. Okay, so on to the other two. RWBY, I think, is going to see a lot of development in the next little bit. I expect to hear more about the Silver Eyes. I expect to see her getting training related to the Silver Eyes. We are likely to see a Penny 2.0, a little sister. I don't think it's going to be Penny herself. I think people who expect Penny to make a reappearance are going to be disappointed. I think it is likely, you know, what occurs to me. Let's see if I can show a different. Hello. Did not. I wish there was a way to just go share. I could do my entire screen share. Okay. There is this. Okay. I expect there to be a new Penny. I expect it to be a Penny's little sister, an improved model or something. I expect it to have a different personality from Penny. And I expect it to be a sadness arc a little bit. One of RWBY has shown a lot of the character development she got at series at the end of volume 3. But the focus in volumes 4 and 5 were on Blake and Yang primarily, with a little bit of setting up Weiss. And mostly the RWBY bits were lore dump or continuing to show her past development. She had a little bit of catalyst towards more development, but it wasn't as much as the other three had. One of the best bits I liked was when her talking to Oscar, when he's thinking about taking his backpack and just leaving, and she's talking to him at one point and praising about how he's working so hard, and she said at one point she says, "Pretty soon you'll be combat ready," and there's this big bright smile on her face, and then it suddenly shifts, and she has this droop to her shoulders, and kind of the sadness creeps in because she realized she just quoted Penny, and then she kind of puts it away to try to keep that mask up for Oscar, and then she goes on to try to encourage Oscar and talk about her losses and all that. That bit in volume 5 where Penny died is, I've seen a lot of people complain that RWBY does not have any character development much at all, that she's always the same goofy person. Well, she's a kid, 14-year-old. She's not going to. She actually is a rather more mature and capable of abstract thought than someone who's 14, 15, 16. Can't really remember what their ages are. I've heard a couple different things. Usually is. But she is still a kid. Her emotions are still out of her physical hormonal levels are out of whack because of puberty. Brain is not entirely developed yet, so it's still finding paths on how to deal with things. So she's going to have bits and pieces, the bits and moments of childishness. But even from the beginning, RWBY has the most active mask active and conscious mask out of all of them. Weiss a close second because the whole nobility do it as a matter of course thing. Yang does not really have a mask. She has a little bit of one. She turns everything into anger. If she has any emotions she doesn't want to deal with, she turns it into anger. But she's actually fairly emotional on key, but she wears her emotions on her sleeve. she doesn't mask what she feels. She doesn't feel the need to for the most part. Um, Blake doesn't mask herself so much as wall herself off. She doesn't show any emotion. And that's a different coping mechanism. Weiss is a similar kind of wall thing, and it's that air of sophistication. That's the nobility's thing. She's trying to hide trying to make sure she doesn't look like she's unhappy. Um, it's a nobility thing. I, it's also how she was raised. I'm not convinced it's nearly as conscious as Ruby's. It starts to break a lot more in places. Um, and she's starting to kind of be more free with her emotions, especially in volumes 4. And in volume 5, what actually Weiss has more trouble with in terms of masking and repression is in repressing her own actions, as in she holds herself back from doing things she wants to do, but I'll get to that later. Ruby actively masks her internal self with a different emotion. Um, One thing to note, looking at the trailers, okay, Yang goes to a nightclub and beats up a bunch of thugs while asking questions about Raven. Um, Weiss has a performance in front of a huge audience and a one-on-one fight with a Grim of some type or an automation of some type that is, I think, kept primarily for training purposes by the Weiss family. And Blake fights a bunch of Schnee Dust Company robots and has her first "I'm leaving you" with the first moment of "I'm leaving you" to Adam, and when she makes the decision to break away from the White Fang as Adam would have it be. Ruby's trailer is she's going to her mother's gravesite and gets swarmed by Grimm. This seemed like just a thing at the beginning, just something to show off the fighting, like with the other three, and it probably was. I mean, all 4 of the trailers are actually a lot deeper into the emotions of the 4 characters than they are on the immediate face of it. And in Ruby's case, what we know about Grimm is they're drawn to feelings of despair, anger, hate, all that. And in Ruby's case, the bit of fight that she has to showcase her abilities is against a bunch of Grimm that come after her, walking alone in the wild. And all of these Grimm are coming to one little girl. That indicates an impressive amount of negative emotions piled up underneath her smiling face. And in fact, her leitmotif, her theme song, Red Like Roses, especially when you go into part 2, is a song about a girl mourning the death of her mother. And a lot of anger and despair goes into that song. Now, this isn't to say that the others aren't experiencing similar levels of negative emotions in their trailers or in their leitmotifs, except for maybe Yang. Hers is a little bit more upbeat, though she is still very much has that attitude of "I'm fighting against the world," which is similar to Blake a little bit, actually. But yeah, Blake and Yang's songs are a lot about the pressures of the world, about fighting against what the world wants, Blake's like Yang's all about fighting all comers, and Blake's all about the oppression of the humans to the faunus. And Ruby's and Weiss's are all about the loneliness, the abandonment. It's an interesting thing. Anyway, we don't know what the levels are because the other three trailers are not in it. Were done to showcase other parts of the world. What we know is that Ruby's at the start of the series, Ruby's negative emotions are intense enough to draw a rather large pack of Grimm to her on her own. Um, and she masks that with being very cheerful and happy all the time in the first few series. You can see it break here and there. There's a part in Players and Pieces in series 1 where Ruby talks about how she wasn't trying to show off, she was just trying to show that she belongs, that she can do this. And that's a big thing. A lot of people, like I said, a lot of people have said there's no character development for Ruby from series 1 and 2 to series 4 and 5, or there's the series 3 evidence event, and then people complain that she just acts like she's always acted. And the problem with that interpretation is that the way Ruby has always acted is a conscious mask. We see the mask break after Penny dies. We see a flash of real Ruby when she grabs Penny's sword to defend Pyra. We have a few bits. There isn't much of the cheeriness left to Ruby for the rest of the end of series 3. She's pretty on business, and emotionally speaking, anger, disbelief, numbness, maybe, but she's kind of just put all of the emotion away, and she's just focused on the fight throughout most of the end of series 3. By series 4, she's put the mask back on. And of course, we're going to see the same behavior because the behavior we saw before wasn't real. And of course, the behavior we're seeing afterwards isn't real in a lot of cases, with the exception. The mask Ruby wears in seasons 4 and 5 is not as thick as the one she wears in seasons 1 through 3. She's deliberately loosened it. And she lets herself out. She takes it off more often to comfort Oscar, and she sometimes puts it on, like to lighten the mood and laugh at Jean's. I don't know if that was the mask. That might have been really her. That might have been a bit of the teenager coming out. Laugh at John's bunny thing on his hoodie. But she still has that mask. The big change after Penny died and after Pyra died is internal motivations that we see a little bit on the surface with Ruby. Ruby in seasons 1 through 3 doesn't really believe anything truly bad is going to happen. She thinks that if she messes up, that there are other people who will catch the mistake and the terrible stuff will be prevented. She is proven right through most of seasons 1 through 3. Her motivation in seasons 1 through 3 is not, she wants to help people, but she doesn't really think that her contribution is going to be the end all break all. She doesn't really think she's going to be a major part. She wants to prove that she can be part of it. She wants to prove herself. That is her motivation in seasons 1 through 3. But she doesn't actually believe herself important enough to be the last line of defense. That she believes she can let herself she believes that if she fails, somebody else will fix it. And she continues to believe that all the way up until Pyra is tricked into killing Penny, at which point her mask is shattered. She is just exposed to just another horrible thing. Just like when she heard her mother died, and she's paralyzed for probably a few minutes. I mean, it looks like she recovers remarkably quick in the story, but remember there was a lot of cutting back and forth, a lot of action. She actually was probably out of sorts for several minutes before she shook herself loose. Pyra, that was probably Pyra's, and Pyra was already off balance with the whole maiden thing, but killing Penny by accident was probably Pyra's first defeat. And it was similar to Ruby, a defeat that showed that my failure caused somebody else to die. Which is why, but she did not have Ruby's past experience, which is why she did not recover nearly as fast as Ruby, and Ruby had to pull her out of it. Ruby's had that loss, or not so much the direct guilt, but she's had that loss and maybe a little bit of the guilt with the loss of her mother and some other things. So she was more used to that. She was able to pull herself back out of the sudden realization faster than Pyra was. But before that moment, she had a youthful, I should say, motivation of proving herself worthy to be a huntress. And she had a little bit more developed understanding of what it meant to be a huntress than her other teammates did, as you can tell, because the professor, the doctor, I can't remember his, Oglek, I'm probably saying it wrong, was going around asking, why do you want to be a huntress? But when it got around to one-on-one with her, she asked him, why did he want to be a hunter? Because that was a question she had already been considering, and this is why it didn't turn around and ask her. She was by asking that question, she was already showing that she was already thinking about that question, and she was looking for what other people said. She's exploring her own answer. So asking her the question wouldn't really be any usefulness. He was asking the other three girls that question to make them think about the question. Ruby is already thinking about the question, is asking him because she is exploring her reasons why. And so he answers her up front because it gives her an example of a reason why. It gives her data to help her exploration. It gives her a map to follow, and following her and figuring out. It gives her a comparison of emotions to figure out her own emotions. But anyway, past season 3, Ruby knows that any mistake she makes could have dire consequences. That everybody on this line of battle is important, and nobody can just take for granted that it'll be okay even if I mess up. So she is much more disciplined, and also she's much more aware of needing to keep other people focused on continuing forward. The mask is back, but the mask used to be for her convenience, so people would stop asking her if she's okay, probably. After the mask is back, after season 3, in season 4 and 5, her mask is there to keep people feeling comfortable, not to keep herself comfortable, to keep other people comfortable. And she knows better when to take it off to comfort people and when to put it back on. She's a lot more adult in that matter than she started off being. And again, we see more of real Ruby in series 4 and 5 than we do in all of seasons 1 through 3. Granted, they're longer series. So anyway, and I think we will see a lot of training with the Silver Eyes because it has been brought up a couple times. I heard somewhere, I didn't hear the reasoning on it, but I heard somewhere the suggestion that what if Crow killed Summer for some reason? I don't know the reasoning of it. I think Salem's people killed Summer because there is a point about from Hazel about we've dealt with their kind before. All of that council's relatively new members. Cinder's pretty young. Hazel wasn't on that council until recently. I'm pretty sure the scientist and the Scorpion weren't there until recently. And it's stated that the characteristic is pretty rare. I'd be surprised if there were other Silver Eyes besides Summer, maybe one or two. So I strongly think that comment from Hazel about we've dealt with their kind before is in reference to Summer and Summer being led into an ambush of some sort. But I think we will see more training with Ruby about that. I think we will see some calling back to Penny and meeting of Penny's father, creator, and commiserating with him, maybe meeting a baby sister or brother or whatever. But that, I think, is where Ruby's going to be. I should note that I do not believe Cinder is dead. There has been no narrative closure of the conflict between Ruby and Cinder. As such, I'm pretty sure we'll see Cinder come back. I don't know if it will be in Series 6. I might be in the stinger for Series 6 that we will see Cinder come back. And I'm talking a long time on this. Anyway, on to Weiss, who I think is going to be the major focus. We will get to see Winter again, probably, because we'd already heard she got recalled to Atlas. I think we're going to see James Ironwood grow increasingly unstable. And the question is whether, let me go switch to, there we go. I think the question is going to be whether they can bring James down from his own paranoia or replace him. I think we'll end up seeing that James has to end up getting replaced. I'm thinking Winter's going to have to step up to take his place. James has been increasingly unreasonable. I mean, there's bits and pieces where, yeah, he's reasonable, but he still refuses to admit that he fell into the plans of Salem and her minions in series 1 through 3. There is a scene where he's talking to Weiss's father, and he kind of forgets himself a little bit about and starts saying, if Ozpin had only listened to me from the start, with the problem being that the actions he wanted to take were the ones the bad guys wanted to happen. So he hasn't gotten the idea that his initial beliefs were the ones that the enemy were depending on, that he was falling into the enemy trick. He hasn't admitted that yet, even though the evidence is pretty obvious. And you can already see that the beard is starting to grow in. I think we'll see a deeper beard later on if it might even be kind of scraggly, because that's not a sign of him wanting to change his appearance. That's a sign of distraction and loss of self-discipline. Where Weiss has a little bit of that falling apart due to trauma, it's really more prevalent in James Ironwood. And his respect for Weiss as a result of that, as Weiss as a result of her actions and Vale, is going to be, and probably Yang too, because Yang was similar. Yang might have to do a call him out as well. But I think we're going to see Ironwood either die or have to step down and Winter step into his place. Now, the big conflict is with Weiss's family. And we've seen a lot of setting it up. And I've heard people, when I've mentioned this before in community places, I've seen people say, but she's already faced off against her family and all that. And no, she hasn't. She took the Blake routes and ran. She does not deal with confrontation very well, even up until the point where she's with in the pilots in that ship and leaving Atlas, and there's the distress call that comes in, and the pirate says, "No way, I'm going to go to that. That sounds dangerous," and she doesn't put her foot down on the matter and regrets it later. So she is still backing down from direct confrontation with people she considers authority. That's why she did a little bit of trying to directly counter her father, directly call him out, but immediately backs down when he puts up any sort of return on that. So in seasons 4 and 5, in season 4, I should say, because she runs away towards the end of season 4, she is not ready to face her father. She is not ready to face her brother and father. And as a side note, we haven't met her mother yet. There is indication that her mother's still alive and suffering an alcohol addiction, but we have not met her mother yet. And I think we'll see that coming in Series 6. And Weiss, I'm hoping, like, okay, I have referred to the Blake Adam thing as Adam receiving a hefty dose of being made irrelevant by Blake, and it was so satisfying. I'm hoping to see Weiss do the same with her father and possibly her brother. A heavy dose of making them irrelevant. Now, it's not quite so simple. Weiss, one of her main motivations is in redeeming her family name, and to do that, she has to have control of the family name. Otherwise, she's a black sheep. So the fact that she's no longer heiress, that her brother has taken that position, means that she is not able to achieve her life goal of addressing the wrongs her company, her father has done in her family name. And so her goals, some of her major life goals, will involve having to take back control of the family. It might be that she can't do it, and it might be she has to encourage her mother to step forward into it. We'll have to see. But I really want to see her have that moment, like we're at the end of Series 5, where Blake steps aside and just doesn't even pull out her weapon, just does the double hammer fist and knocks Adam down, and then doesn't even bother to go off and have a duel with him, stays in the fight and stays in helping the main situation, doesn't give in to the bait. I want to see something like that with Weiss and her family. Of course, it's not going to be combat oriented because neither her father nor her brother represent physical threats. They represent social, political, emotional threats. So it'll be an interesting battlefield to see. It'll be more like that scene in the Batman Begins at the end where it gets revealed that Bruce Wayne has bought up the entirety of Wayne Corporation through many different shell companies. And I just bumped the microphone. I apologize. I'm hoping to see something like that. Either Weiss pull it off or Weiss get her mother to pull it off. One of the two. So by the end of Series 6, I'm hoping to see the Schnee Dust Company in the hands of, and Atlas in the hands of the Schnee women. Depending on whether Weiss's mother is a strong enough personality to get over her addiction or not. It might be Winter and Winter in both categories. I think we'll see more from that scientist that showed up in Series 4 and 5, the outcast Atlas scientist. I think he'll become a major enemy in the next couple of bits. And I think we'll see a lot more of the Faunus and human divide in Atlas than we have in other series. But we've already had a series worth of setting it up, so I'm hoping it resolves in Series 6. It might not. It might continue on to Series 7 because Mistral was a 2-series arc. So Atlas might be a 2-series arc as well. In which case, Series 6 will be setting up Series 7 to be the resolution. We'll have to see. In fact, Series 6, we're going to first have to see them sneak into Atlas, since Atlas's borders are closed. And I doubt that Weiss wants to try to use her name to sneak into the borders with everybody. As to other things, I've already said I kind of hope Raven Branwen. No, I don't actively hope. She's an interesting character, and I do like to see redemption stories and recovery stories, so I would like to see her develop into something worthy of a human being. That's a terrible thing to say about anybody, but I'd like her to see her get over her cowardice. I want to see more development with Emerald Sistai, mental illusions girl. She has exhibited signs of regret for all the evil things going on here and there, and that has, narratively speaking, that tends to lead towards either a heel face turn where a bad guy becomes a good guy, or it's an indication of her becoming worse than anything Cinder was ever. It's hard to say with her. She could turn out to be one of the worst villains, or she could decide that all of the things she's been doing were wrong. She could make redemption. So I don't know which direction she's going for sure yet. So I want to see more development that way. I think also would like to hear more about Hazel, but I'm not sure he'll be prominent in Series 6. I think it will be more that that scientist. As to a couple other things, I think that we're going to end up seeing the RWBY girls end up being the 4 maidens by the end of the series. I can't say that with any certainty, but it would be a typical development for this sort of story. In which case, I'm thinking Yang is summer, Weiss is winter, of course. And I tend to look. I want the my impulse is to say that Blake will be spring and um, Ruby will be fall, but I kind of want that to be reversed as it goes along with my some of my shipping ideas. Um, but which is silliness. Anyway, onward. Another thing that's possible is there is a moment where I forget which it is. That's not it. Okay. There is a moment in one of the episodes. Ruby and company. Whoop 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 whoop. I was doing. Yeah. Well, okay. I forgot I was doing full screen. So let's stop the screen share. Okay. Actually, I can do this. Okay. And I'm doing that again. Okay. So I'm going to stop the screen share. Actually, I'll go back to the screen share and do an application window. Uh, so I'm not entirely sure um, about this, but there is a point where they're camping on the way to Mistral, and Ruby wakes up hearing voices in her head, uh, Pyra and Cinder. Now, that could just be trauma and remembering the events, but it, the point where she wakes up was only focused on that and her having the headache and all that. And it just kind of reminds me as the initial early showings of Ozpin talking to Oscar. And I'm wondering if somehow the thing that they were doing with the Fall Maiden and Pyra affected Pyra's soul in a way similar to, and maybe the Silver Eyes, in a way similar to how Ozpin's soul works. And I'm wondering if Pyra is now a part of RWBY or in RWBY, or the same way Ozpin is part of Oscar. It's the most left field, unlikely of theories I've had in a long while. It kind of feels like that. And I only have the one scene for evidence yet, so kind of interested to see about that going anywhere. I'm not entirely sure. And anyway, so those are my current thoughts on RWBY coming out. And this has been going on for close to an hour. I think more than an hour. So I don't think anybody's going to want to watch this. Anyway, talk to you later.